I wanted to begin with this notion that as a species we're these inherent storytellers and we learn through metaphors and communicate through narratives. I actually first discovered the power of a well-told story when one was written about me by my pa, called Alexandra's Accident. The story goes that I was 8 years old and going for a stroll with my pa. He pointed at a very old and collapsed brick wall and he said, "Alex, don't go near that brick wall, it'll fall on you." Of course, as a natural-born rebel and know-it-all, I went up to the brick wall, looked my pa in the eye, and touched the brick wall. The brick wall began approaching me, and luckily my pa pulled me away, but not quite in time because the brick wall still got on my foot and I had a fractured ankle and was in crutches for a month afterwards. My dissidence was a source of entertainment for my whole family, but more significantly, it inspired, such a simple event inspired my pa to write a story that can kind of pervade different cultures and contexts, because essentially a child's disobedience is something that any culture can relate to. Children are disobedient, right? And it showed me that day-to-day events can still be an inspiration and can still tell a story. It doesn't have to be a big, complex idea or thing. The next time I actually engaged with this idea of storytelling was when I worked on the ABC, or had work experience on the ABC radio with Fiona Wiley on her statewide drive program in New South Wales. Here I learned a lot about the mechanisms of talkback radio, but what I mainly took away from my time on the ABC radio was that every single person has their own unique story, and people care about those. Why else would we listen to talkback radio if we didn't want to hear their stories and want to hear what they had to say? Whether it be truckies or parents picking their kids up from school, everybody has something to say and wants to be heard, and we reciprocate that by wanting to hear what they say. I grew up in a very small town. There wasn't heaps to do, but one of the main things that I love doing is reading. As a young kid, my parents read me a lot of Roald Dahl and Dr. Seuss, and I grew up fostering this idea that stories are everywhere and stories inspire us and help us, connect, and they're interesting and exciting. I was also very lucky in the sense that my dad used to be very into music. He still is, but was in lots of bands when he was younger. And I grew up listening to a lot of Beatles, and I discovered music can kind of tell stories too. Last year I was lucky enough to go on a gap year to England. I lived on a small island off the coast of England called the Isle of Wight. The Isle of Wight is really well known for its music festival, which started in the 60s. So the island has a real sense of kind of this musical spirit to it. And throughout the UK I saw a lot of different artists and went to lots of museums and galleries which had a big presence of British musicians there. I also read a lot because it's pretty cold in England and sometimes there's not much to do except curl up in a blanket and read. So I think going to England reaffirmed my passion for music and art and books essentially. When I arrived back in Australia, I got a job at the ladies fashion brand Q. I've always had a really keen interest in fashion. I've read a lot of magazines growing up. But I think Q really showed me how fashion and clothes can really have an identity embedded within them. And the other thing I love about Q is that it's an Australian brand. And I think going to England, I saw amazing international art, but I'm really passionate about promoting Australian brands and almost, in a sense, telling this Australian story. So the main three fields I'm interested in are fashion, books, and not fields, but mediums, fashion, books, and music. So I'm hoping throughout my degree in media and entertainment industries to figure out my niche and what I love the most, but I'm still going to find that out, I think. In the future, a field I'm really interested in is fashion editing, particularly for a fashion magazine. The editor-in-chief, Jess Blanche, kind of summarized the quintessential power of a magazine in saying that it can tell stories, and that is a big part of it. But beyond that ability to tell stories, there's a scope to promote and develop talent and I think really support smaller, less known brands, businesses, musicians, artists, which I think is really exciting. So I would love to work for an Australian magazine and promote Australian artists to help them tell their stories. Another field I'm really interested in is management and marketing, that side of entertainment industries. So in that sense, I'd love to perhaps do the marketing for an Australian fashion brand. On my slide I have a photo of Sophie Andre, who is the brand director of Ellery. and her role sees the promotion of Ellery and to tell the story of Ellery. And Ellery started with a very small Australian market in 2009, and in 2020, Ellery has 85% of its clientele overseas, internationally, which I think that's amazing that it started not very long ago and just grew so much through your ability to communicate and to connect with people. And I think essentially marketing is about telling stories, as Seth Godin on my slide upholds. It's about storytelling and selling the story of the particular brand or event that you're trying to promote. I'd also be really interested in promoting and managing music festivals. I love Australian music. I am very in support of promoting and supporting the Australian music industry, because I think what we have here is so special, and I want to continue telling the Australian story. International art is fantastic, but so is Australian stuff, and I think that's another thing I realised on my time overseas. But essentially, whether it be through the mediums of fashion, books, or music, I would love to be able to promote and help spread the Australian story and identity.